Hey, everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host, Mike, and with me, as always, is Evan.
Feeling chaotic today.
I think you're chaotic every day, but that's a different conversation for another time. So, as Evan, as always, is giving us the hint, we are going to be talking about the Warriors of Chaos today. They're definitely one of our favorite armies. Well, let's face it, almost every army is our favorite army because we love Old World and so much. But it's definitely one of those armies I personally feel really connected to. They're so thematic, they are so core and integral to the not just the gameplay, but the visuals and the story and the background and the history of the old world and everything that Games Workshop and Warhammer is based upon. And they're so iconic, the models and figures. They really are
hmm
some of the most Warhammer iconic things. When you see a Chaos Warrior, you know what it is, and it's really special.
Yeah, definitely goes a big throwback to me for seeing the Warhammer Mark of Chaos trailer when it came out 20 something years ago. Uh,
Hmm.
there's a warrior priest leading a unit of state troops through the woods, and they get kind of ambushed by all these chaos warriors who are just these silent, hulking, metallic barbarians who are just coming at them from the woods, and they're like, "Oh God, what are we gonna do?" And they just all charge at them, and they just get massacred. It's great.
Yeah,
Love it.
and they're just so different from, they're so iconic in terms of their visual art style and even the models throughout the years. They've evolved many times and many different versions of them, but they all, if you put them up side by side, line them up, they're like clearly Chaos Warriors. And so that's what we're talking about today. We're really excited. We think they've done a great job with the Warriors of Chaos in the old world, even though they did take a different spin where they had less of a focus on demonic rules, less of a focus on the gods and powers and such, but it definitely feels very thematic. Lots of flavor things you could do. Some of the most powerful characters in the game. So why don't we dive in again? Let's tackle our format. This will be a two-part episode. So the first part will cover the characters and the magic items and some of those combinations and such. Then in a part two, we'll go over more of the core factions and units. So
Yeah.
Evan, let's dive in. Let's talk about composition. How do you build this army?
Well, almost always you put 50% of your points in characters because these are some of the most powerful characters in the game if you have enough points for them. I imagine at lower points values, they might actually have a harder time. If you're playing like a 500 point game or an 800 point game, you actually might be like, oh, darn, what do I take, right? But hey,
Hmm.
if you got a lot of points, let's talk about the big beat stick. So first off, you either have a Chaos Lord or a Demon Prince, and I can't see taking a Grand Army where you don't take one of the two because the
Hmm.
Chaos Lord is just best in slot melee character in the game who has some of the most amazing mounts choices um, as well. So you can just kind of level up your Chaos Lord over time if you want. You know, kind of be like, hey, I'll start off with a guy on foot, and then maybe I'll put him on a chariot, and then hey, how about a dragon? There we go.
Hmm.
Or
Hmm.
my personal favorite is the Demon Prince because this guy
Yeah.
has been touched by the divine specifically, and he's been chosen to go out there and just be a hulking, awesome jerk. And be monstrous infantry and a wizard and a flyer and a melee guy, and he's just a total asshole. He's just like, I'm gonna
Well,
do
let's
whatever
just
the
face
hell you
it.
want.
He's super cool. I mean,
Yes.
both are awesome. You can't go wrong with either. And as Evan said, we'll get more into details in a bit, but they are some of the most powerful single characters in the game,
Yes.
which is different than other editions, right? In previous editions, actually the best in slot for pure stat wise actually used to be the Vampire Lord. Now in this edition, it is the Chaos Lord has the best in slot pure stat line, but you are going to pay the points for it, as Evan is saying, and we'll go more to that later. So definitely,
Yeah.
the lower points games are going to be a little bit more restricted, but if you have a 2,000 point army and you do decide to spend 50% of your allowance as you can into characters, which a lot of players do, you can get some of the most powerful characters in the game with different combinations. So yeah, definitely a Lord or Demon Prince, pretty much expected at a 2,000 point level.
Right. So then there's also the Exalted Champion, who is kind of like that mid-level hero we've been seeing quite a lot, where it's partway between a hero level character and a lord level character.
Hmm.
Although I mean, hey, 3 wounds, so you could do worse, right? And a lot of attacks and a lot of weapon skills. So this guy is pretty great. And guess what? He can also be your battle standard bearer. That's
Hmm.
like that's actually pretty entirely unique that you can have like this 3 wound badass guy who's I can also just be your BSB too. It's like if a Bretonian Baron could be the BSB. It's like that's great. I
Hmm.
like that. And you
Yeah.
also have the Sorcerer Lord, who has the combat stats of an Empire General, but he's also a wizard.
Hmm. Hmm.
Great. That's great. I
Yeah.
love that.
Well, because they all start as Chaos Warriors, right? And
It's
he's
true.
wearing Chaos armor, right? So he is a
No,
badass unto
Mike,
itself.
what you're doing is you're pointing out that a Chaos Warrior unit champion has the stats of an Empire General. That's what you're pointing out right now.
Well, to be fair, they are the chosen of chaos in many ways. So you're not wrong about that. But I think the interesting thing here is right. It's also 1,000 points
Yeah.
per in particular. So while
Yeah.
you technically could take a Chaos Lord or Demon Prince, and you're like, oh, I'll fit two Sorcerer Lords because it's 1 per 1,000 points. Well, you're never going to fit all those things unless they literally had nothing on them. Which, soon as
Yeah.
you take these things, like I want to have the magic items, I want to have the cool mounts, I want to have the demonic powers, you're going to see those points go real fast. So
Yeah,
technically,
the
while
0
you
to
could
1
field them that
limits,
way,
they're
not going to
pretty
happen.
weird at the 2,000 point breakpoint exactly because oftentimes the things that are limited to 0 to 1 are over 250 points anyway. So there would never be a way to take three of them in that slot, for example, if they're
Yeah.
rare or stuff like that, right? But in this case, yeah, that this limit will only really matter at 1,500 points or 2,800 if you somehow were playing that. Then I guess this might matter. But yeah, but I mean, basically, the point is that the Chaos Lord and Demon Prince are not out of the same pool of slots that your Sorcerer Lord
Mhm.
is. So you could have a Demon Prince and two Sorcerer Lords somehow.
Yep, if that's the way you wanted to go. Or if, again, some people also just want to go heavy on the magic and just invest heavily into level 4 wizards, which you can with this army list.
Yeah, and then we have aspiring champions who are pretty much I've seen only ever taken when people are like, oh, I'm gonna play Heralds of Darkness and I need guys to go on my chariots, so I'm just gonna take those guys. Or Exalted
Mhm.
Sorcerers who actually have a pretty good place in the army because of the lore of Tzeentch or the Mark of Tzeentch, where you're just I'm just a magic missile guy and I have extra bonuses to cast because I'm hanging out with some friends. So we'll get into that when we get into the specifics. But basically, you've got some of the best kind of Lord level beatstick guys and some pretty good backup dancers too.
Yeah, and I think the main theme with these characters, again, they're very skewed, heavily, very melee focused, very magic focused. The Demon Prince can potentially be both, but you will pay a premium for that.
Yeah,
But you're not going to see a lot of those like you would in Empire or Wood Elves utility characters, right?
support. Yeah,
You're not going to see that the support utility or the high mobility in terms of dancing around, skirmishing quite just as much. These characters can fly in different things, but they're very clearly, this thing is punching you in the face, this thing is shooting spells. So it is very focused in what you are offered here.
yeah. That's not really that much of a problem though, because if you want to support units, you can just take some of those whatever you call them, the mutations that do that, which are amazing. So we'll get to that later, but you don't need to be a warrior priest having a 50-50 shot of giving a minor buff to a unit when you can instead just buy an upgrade that has the buff all the time.
That is a good strategy.
All right. So we'll start off looking into Champions of Chaos. So again, we have our three different tiers of lords here. You can see that they do cost quite a lot. I mean, for example, an Empire Captain is 45 points. So an Aspiring Champion is
Hmm.
already almost twice that much. But you get a
Hmm.
lot of beat stick with this guy. So he does have, like the three attacks, for example, and he has the Chaos Armor. So he already has a ward save. And every single Chaos Lord character has that. So especially if you're playing really massive games like 5,000 points, the fact that all of your characters are going to have items that, for example, in other armies might be really limited is very,
Hmm.
very strong. The Exalted Champion is one step higher than that, so you got the higher strength and more attacks. Now, this guy would be perfectly fine. I think that the weapon skill 6 is definitely a problem because it's kind of the worst weapon skill in the game. Because it literally, the only thing that's better about weapon skill 6 over 5 is that you hit weapon skill 5 guys on 3 plus. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. So it's the worst one pip upgrade.
Yeah, I think it's really just the points efficiency, right? The
Yeah,
reality is, if you could take the Exalted Champion at a weapon skill 5 for 15 less points, you would in a heartbeat, right? Versus, hey, would you spend 15 points to ever go from like a 5 to a 6? You wouldn't, because as Evan's pointing out, the brackets that this actually becomes applicable on what's in the game is very
yeah,
few. So it's just not worth it. You really want to be 5 and save some money on your cost, or you want to be 7 because this is one of the best baseline stats you're going to get for that in the game.
yeah. But I mean, it's still good because there are a lot of people who are weapon skill 5 that you can then hit on threes, like just elite
Hmm.
infantry units or some of my like Empire characters that can be weapon skill 5. So it's not a bad weapon skill to be. And then
And
weapon
you
skill
always
7.
have Gaze of the Gods. always
That's
might
true.
come into play too.
Yeah,
So
so you can
that
just wait until that
depending on
happens,
your
and then
luck.
now you're good, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and you're going to be upgrading the weapon skill of, let's say, a chariot. If you were going to take Exalted Champion, stick them on your chosen chariot or something like that. Well, now you've upgraded
Yeah.
the weapon skill, so there you go. That's useful.
Hmm.
All right,
Hmm.
and so then the Chaos Lord. The Chaos Lord's got weapon skill 7, so that's almost top tier. I mean, I think there are things that are Bloodthirster's weapon skill 10. The Blade Dancer character is weapon skill 8. But weapon skill 7 is amazing, and that's your starting point. So if you ever start adding more weapon skill on top of that, great, right? But he also gets to be
Hmm.
toughness 5. That's also huge. So this guy is basically, dwarf lord level. But I think the big headline though is the 4 wounds. I don't know when they
Yeah.
decided that some of the characters were just going to be like, yeah, I'm going to have 4 wounds. Screw it. It's great. I
There's
mean, it's.
very few
I'm
that
very
have
jealous.
4 wounds. Very few that have 4 wounds and 5 attacks. Both 4 wounds and 5 attacks on lower level characters across
Yeah,
all of Old World. That's very uncommon. So
it's
that those
literally
are some pretty
just the
big stats.
Chaos Lord, um, and the Bretonian Duke who have that, and then
Hmm.
there's like the monster infantry characters like the Doom Bull and the Tyrant, but those guys can't ride any mounts, so then there's
Nope.
less potential there.
Hmm.
Also, one of the reasons why you're going to see a Chaos Lord all the time is the Chaos Lord's the only leadership 9 character other than Demon Prince, and
Hmm.
he's only one of these 3 who has full plate armor. So even if you're trying to shave some points here or there, those 2 pips of upgrade are very, very, very useful. And to be honest, I think that he's just massively worth those 70 points, right?
Yeah, and it just depends on, of course, how you're playing your army. More often than not, you're typically going to see this character on a dragon, in which case the leadership 9 is often not as applicable because you're typically not around your troops and supporting them. Or I've also seen him on mounts, horses, demonic steeds, things of that sort. So he would be closer to, surrounded by bricks of cavalry and things of that sort, in which case the leadership would come into play. So leadership 9 is good, but more often than not, this is such a beat stick character. You want to throw it at your opponent as fast as possible. You want to maximize over the 6 turn game how many times he can get into combat. So typically he's rushing ahead of everything else. But
These guys have
again,
Rallying
just depends how
Cry.
you play. What? Yeah.
They have Rallying Cry too. They get to be like, no, you come back here. Like I thought that was like an Empire thing. That oh wow,
I
okay.
don't know why I thought it was an Empire thing. That's just a cool character thing. So
That
let's
is
go
really
through some of the other
useful.
stuff. Of course, as Evan said, the full plate armor is one of the biggest differences in the
Yeah,
equipment. They're all chaos armor, but and it is worth pointing out, like there's different tiers of chaos armor in this book, but the character chaos armor here for the lords is a 5+ ward save chaos armor. So that is the sweet spot where you're not having to, the 6 up ward save is super unreliable, not great. A 5 up, that's a 1 in 3 chance. Odds are pretty good. You're going to make some of those. And you typically, if you're buying ward saves, you're going to be buying the 5 up ward saves anyway, because the 4 up ward saves are very expensive if your army has access to them. So the fact that they have a 5 up ward save baked in to any of their armors is a massive, even though you don't see how that directly reflects in the points. It's not just the great stats, but having a built-in 5 up ward save is a pretty big deal.
yes, definitely, definitely. Also, the ensorcelled weapon. So, one of the things that gives you is you say, okay, my hand weapon's going to have AP1 and magical attacks. So then, if I just take a non-magic weapon and I get to have to fight the Green Knight or someone ethereal, well, I have a backup, and you can actually pick them. So, ensorcelled weapon is really, really useful, and a lot of people are very jealous of that. That's probably worth 10, 15 points by itself as well. So the Chaos Armor is worth like 30 points. The ensorcelled weapon's worth like 15. And then Gaze the Gods, which is one of the most broken abilities in the game because you can just infinitely stack buffs on yourself until you are like He-Man, and it's amazing. I think that if they could just say, okay, only one at a time, fair enough. But the fact that it's just like, go for it, stack infinitely is very insane. And
Well,
it makes you want to just
I
take as many characters as you can, so you can just keep doing it.
Yeah, I think where it's supposed to net out is the buff side of the Gaze of the Gods is very powerful, but the downsides are very minimal. And we'll get into that when we dive more into the Gaze of the
Downsides are
Gods
non
table.
existent.
Well, they could come into play, but again, if you roll stupid and you fail a leadership test and your dragon wants to pull off a really big charge and is not able to, like, but the number of things that have to happen for that to come into play, the odds are very low. So this is why Evan's saying
Yeah,
they're
Mike, it's almost like
non-existent.
you want to have a very, really cheap, extremely common item that lets you re roll that. Hmm. Hmm.
You were not wrong,
Hmm.
sir. You were not wrong. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go. We'll get to the
Okay.
magic items, the gaze of the gods table.
So
But
yeah,
they
something
have
we
other
haven't
things
covered
here.
yet. Yeah, there are characters. There's marks, and the different marks have different rules. Mark of Corn gives you frenzy, which for one thing gives you immune to psychology, but also gives you the extra attack and makes you have to charge. Mark of Nurgle gives you have people have to reroll sixes against you to hit in close
Hmm.
combat. So it basically makes you pretty durable against poison in close combat only, not against shooting, which is also useful. Slaanesh makes you immune to panic and gives you higher initiative, kind of like you're an elf. Those things are very useful, and I think that people don't take Slaanesh enough
Hmm.
because initiative math is a big deal. If you are one
Hmm.
initiative higher than the other person, you kill them before they do anything. So good. And then Tzeentch gives you the ability to have better casting when you're in a unit. So pretty much people exclusively take Mark of Nurgle on the Chaos Lord on a dragon. But I think Marcus Slaanesh is actually quite interesting and can come up as being useful as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where Corn is an offensive buff, but effectively because you lose some control, it's not taken as off. Certainly not on the Lord characters. Sometimes maybe on your lesser characters you'll see it where it's not as much of a big deal if you lose control. Nurgle is about defense effectively, so when you spend a lot of points on a character, you want to make him as defensible and survivable as possible, which is why it's so popular. Slaanesh really is that utility, and it's
Mm-hmm.
great when it works, but it doesn't always come into play. I think that's the reason why people are hesitant about it, and it doesn't make your dragon any faster if you happen to, and often he's on the dragon. So that's where I think players are less keen to invest in that. And
Very
while
true, but
Tzeentch is
Initiative 7 is a
great,
massive breakpoint for people charging you and you getting to hit them before they hit you.
true,
So
that's
if you
true.
go from 6 to 7 because of Marcus Lanesh, then someone who's like, an Empire Wizard with Spectral Doppelganger and a Dragon Slayer sword, you kill him before he gets to do it.
Yep.
Okay, and then Tzeentch is totally, I mean, pretty much irrelevant for any of the melee guys, right? I mean, it's just it pretty much only affects the casting. It used to be that Mark of Tzeentch gave you some kind of like a ward save benefit, but now it's just this thing about casting. So you just see it exclusively on all your wizards at this point, right? Anyway, you can obviously mark your whole army a certain mark to be very thematic. I would love it if people did that more. I would do it if I was playing Words of Chaos. I think it's great. Um, and then you can also take the gifts of chaos. We'll get to those later. That's the specific combos. Kind of you go with gifts and the items. You can combo it all up with the mount, and then you have this completely insane psycho. And then we have the different amounts of points. So yeah, you have 100 points, 75 or 50 points of magic items. That's really standard for these tiers of character. However,
Hmm.
remember, you didn't have to buy a ward save already. So you have 30
Yeah,
more points than everybody else. That's
yeah.
massive.
It definitely makes it. That being said, your characters are you more expensive typically by the default. So there's
Yeah,
pros and
that's
cons
true.
here, but generally speaking, you can stack the most powerful single character model really with the Chaos Lord than you can compared to anything else in the game. Not to say there aren't counters to it. They die all the time. There are plenty of
Yeah.
things that can counter it, but it is hard to. And again, it's very appealing to put that Chaos Lord, a huge, powerful character on a dragon and just go to town, and it's super fun until someone shows up with Monster Slayer sword or power or ability, and oops, rolls that, and you fail
Well,
your save, ward save, and
and
off
when you
and
go to a
you're toast.
tournament, every single high table player has a plan to deal with this guy
This
specifically. So
guy,
you're not
yeah,
surprising anyone,
he
right?
was the terror because remember when this edition came out, we went through different phases, which is normal of any game release or edition release. Of the meta is always in flux as players are finding in new combos, new methods, and such, and then people learn how to deal with them, and then it goes into the next thing, right? The scream lists was a big terror for a while, but it hasn't been for quite some time. People have learned how to deal with it, and the dragon is the same thing. Dragons are still very common because let's face it, dragons are awesome. They're really cool, but certainly the players at the top tables know how to deal with them and bring the tools and resources in order to handle that situation.
All right, so let's talk about my favorite, the Demon Prince. So
He's so cool.
he's got monster infantry, which means he would normally be able to join units, but because he's unbreakable and warp spawned, and nothing else in your army has all that jazz, then he can't join anybody. But that's fine because he can instead hide behind nearby units, like we're playing 40k Ninth Edition, and he's just like, you can't shoot me, you can't shoot me, while he casts spells and decides, okay, now is the time for me to charge flying across the table like a psychopath into an unsuspecting wizard or the flank of a unit of knights, and then just massacre all of those guys. He gets to have very high weapon skill, Strength 6. Okay. Toughness 5 and 4 wounds. So this is pretty standard for kind of a lower level monster efficiency character, except for the 4 wounds. Like a Tyrant or a Doombull do have 5, but that's not that big of a deal when he has a 4 up ward save and
And
initiative 7.
regeneration.
Those are huge. The only
Yeah.
problem is that he's unstable. So basically, you have to, before you commit him to combat, in your mind, do the math for what the combat res is going to be, so you don't send him in there when a bunch of marauders are also in combat. They all get murdered, and then the Deep Prince goes pop.
Yeah, or just the reality, you got to think about it. He has the potential to do so much damage, but he still only has 5 attacks. And you typically don't have rerolls with this character. So plenty of times, like, oh, I have 5 attacks. I hit on 3s, no problem. You roll in and oh crap, 1 hit, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly the combat resolution, if you ran into a brick of something that starts with a combat res of 4 or 5, you're going to be in trouble because of unstable. So this is why he is very powerful.
Yeah.
But it's easy to make mistakes and to put this character in a situation that's going to backfire on you. So you typically want to combo him with things, and you need to be much more selective in picking and choosing what you're going to throw this character into. But he is so cool and so flexible. He has the potential to do just about anything, even spells. We'll get to that in a second. But warp spawn, as Evan pointed out, that's the thing that people often overlook, or people get super excited the first time they read this book and they see this character and they think about all the cool units they can put it with. Oh, I can put it with this, put it with that. And it's the warp spawn rule that prevents you from
And
having him
Unbreakable,
join
yeah.
other units.
Well, I guess if,
Yeah.
if he didn't have Warp Spawn, he could join Chaos Spawn, I think.
Yeah, there are other
Unbreakable,
things
but
that
yeah.
could join, but nothing else has warp spawn. That was intentionally by design that they did that. So trust
Yeah.
me, we've looked at the books, as everyone has many times. This is a solo demon prince who's still incredibly fun. But the important thing is you can shield him again by being near other units. He is monstrous infantry, right? So as long as there's an infantry unit, it doesn't have to be a monster unit. As long as there's an infantry unit with 5 models or more, not unit strength 5 models or more, then he will not be able to be targeted, just like any other independent character. So you can still hover around your bricks of units, and then when the time is right, strike and leap out from there.
So something else to note here is that first of all, so he can have fly. You can just buy that for yourself. You can have heavy armor,
And
but
you should,
the
because it's
fact that you
awesome.
have armor means you can then buy magic armor. So you can buy armor of silvered steel for a 3+ armor save, or there's a one that's a full plate and gives you higher toughness from the Arcane Journal. We'll talk about that when we get to the Arcane Journal reviews. But this guy is very Swiss Army knife. So you can take the Mark of Tzeentch, and look, the wizard levels are cheaper than everybody else. They're 25 points each instead of 30. So instead of taking 120 points to get to a level 4, like a Vampire Lord, I guess 90 for a Vampire Lord to get to level 3, he can get to level 4
Yep.
with Mark of Tzeentch for 110 points. So he's casting at +5. Like, right? Well, no, he doesn't get the Tzeentch bonus unless he's in
No,
a unit, right? So he
he's
just
not
gets.
a unit, so he would
So
get the
people take
magic
Mark of Tzeentch for the
resistance
spell,
bonus.
right?
You want the spell because it gives you one of the best magic missiles in the game, as that you sub out for the lore, and also gives them magic resistance. But it won't get them the +1 to cast, because you only get that if you join a unit with the Mark of Tzeentch. He can't join a unit.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So then he's still, but the levels to buy are cheaper. So the thing is,
You
he
can
starts
make
at
this guy,
215.
but he's great.
Yeah, he starts at 215, but he very, very
Pricey.
often goes to 500 points because of all the things that people choose to buy. Now, you could just not be a wizard, not fly, and just have a really awesome rugby player who just says, hey, if anyone gets behind me like Peg Knights, I'm going to go massacre them. But
Mm-hmm.
most people don't do that because instead they have a dragon. So this is just the debate. And I see almost every Warriors Chaos player goes down the route of I'm going to buy every upgrade I can. And I don't know whether that's necessarily the best. It's just that's what it tends to have, right?
Yeah, I'm not convinced it is. And keep in mind, one of the things this guy can do that the dragon can't is this guy. You give him fly. He's by himself. He's a lone character. He's skirmishing. That means he has a 360 charge arc to deal with things like Pegasus or other harassment units, right, and
Yeah.
such. So the dragon can't do that. So in terms of flexibility, in terms of battlefield utility and dealing with different situations, different places, he's far more flexible than the dragon. He doesn't have the durability of the dragon or the full damage potential output of the dragon, but he is more of a utility piece, and you can craft him in so many different ways and combos, and how you can construct him. I don't think we've even seen them all yet, because I think people are pretty focused on the dragon still.
Yeah. super cool. I think that if you were allowed to take the Chaos Lord on a dragon and one of him, it would just be every single army would have both, and it'd be very sad. So
Which is good that
obviously,
they don't do that.
yeah. So instead, people generally have the Sorcerer Lord. So what do we have with the Sorcerer Lord? Well, pretty surprisingly good weapon skill, and
Hmm.
strength and toughness. Very similar to a regular Warrior Chaos. But to be fair, this is the same stat line of an Empire General. So
Hmm.
yeah,
And he's a wizard.
yeah, and he gets to have the Chaos armor. So he gets to wear armor and have the ward save all baked in. He also has the ensorcelled weapon. So if you give him no other weapon at all, he still has an AP1 magical attack weapon with his 3 attacks.
Hmm.
It's fine.
Hmm.
He can also gaze the gods himself, so that's also really cool. I think that the biggest downside he has is that he's toughness 4, so that if he gets on a lot of the mounts, a lot of the mounts out there don't only provide like +1 toughness like the dragon and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
if he rides a manticore, the manticore that he's riding is toughness 4, which is
Not
weird. I
ideal.
I really wish they had just done the thing they did with chariots, where they said this mount is toughness X, and then you just use that one instead of your own. It would be less weak because there's just a couple of weird cases like that where it's like,
Yeah.
what is going on? So
I think that was an example where they were trying to streamline the rules to make it more accessible and didn't realize until that there are some edge cases where it's a problem. I
well, it's
believe
also
that is what
different than
happens.
the chariots because the chariots don't work that way either. The
I
chariot, like if he rides a chariot, he's toughness 5, but if he rides a manticore, he's toughness 4.
Yep. But that's the way it is currently. I expect in the future, whether it's later in this edition or next edition, I
Yeah.
expect them to address that in at some point.
So something to point out here when we're talking about the wizards, though, is that they have 3 lores of magic, which is
Hmm.
not. I think maybe 4 is about average, so that's not as many. And also, what do we not see? We don't see elementalism. We don't see illusion. Elementalism and
Nope.
illusion are almost every other army in the game, except
Hmm.
Warriors of Chaos and Beastmen, pretty much.
Hmm.
So that's interesting, and it's going to play a lot into how the army plays because those 2 lores are very useful for controlling and for providing other units buffs. So because you don't have those, what tends to happen is people take simply battle magic and they just use their wizards as machine guns that just shoot people.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the most common one: battle magic and taking Tzeentch. So you have a yet another magic missile, and then they'll take like the Ruin, and they'll just try and turn their sorcerer into a machine gun type of spell flinger, which can be very effective in in most battles. Not effective in all battles. It just depends on the situation. They have less utility. Demonology still can provide some really great buffs, but a lot of the demonology buffs require the sorcerer to be in the unit that's being buffed. And so now you're committing his capabilities of this character to a single unit when typically you don't want your character, certainly your wizard, to get into combat. Sometimes you do, but generally speaking, you don't. So there's
Well,
a
when he's
bit of
weapon
a
skill
conflict
5, you're
there.
okay with it.
It is, but that also means he's focused on just that unit. And you get to a point where if you're spending
Yeah.
this many points on a wizard in a unit, wouldn't you have been better spending less points to just take another Beatstick Chaos character? So this is where you kind of get into this. Was this really worth it? Depends on the situation. Sometimes the Sorcerer Lord buffing a unit of knights or warriors is going to be the better choice.
Yeah.
Sometimes it isn't. So it just depends, right? But that really suddenly caters him to he's now very specific in his role and not as flexible. And then dark magic again has some utility more so than the other two, but certainly not. You're not seeing control, and you're not seeing nearly as much utility
Well,
as
the
other
intention
lores
is
would
that
have access to.
Phantasmagoria is giving you control, but that spell is the most complicated one in the game that I've never seen do what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to say
Yeah,
either you run away from the scary thing or it forces you to charge me. Either way, I win. But the order of operations doesn't work for how long it takes for that spell to actually start working. I've
yeah,
never seen
I,
it actually
I agree.
work.
It's just the terms and conditions for that to trigger the way you want it to are too complicated, or just too many steps have to happen, which results in it rarely happening. So which
Or
is
you just
why
forget.
that makes sense. Or you just forget. But dark magic again, you do get the battle lust is really the best spell in that entire lore. Where you get that's one of the rare times in the book where you can give a unit reroll. But now you're taking the entire lore for one spell, so you could see that this is the reason why people typically default to battle magic. It's straightforward. It's simple. I punch hard with these characters, and this wizard's going to shoot hard, and it can be incredibly effective. Again, one of the most typical patterns you see with the Wars of Chaos is they're going to, the best defense is a good offense, and they're going to punch you as hard as they possibly can, as fast as they possibly can. And sometimes you can't recover from that if you're not prepared for it.
Well, the other thing to point out is that it's not just that battle magic might be a little bit more utilitarian. It's also the fact that it has shooting spells where this is an army that has no other shooting really. You've got a hell cannon,
That's
which is awful,
true.
and you have javelins that some marauders throw. So you don't have
Hmm.
a hellblaster volley gun. You don't have, some poison archers. You just have a battle magic caster, and that's it.
Yeah, and also the army itself also has very few utility movement units at all. And so having arcane urgency, or the potential for arcane urgency, is one of the rare opportunities that this army can, as Evan pointed out, it allows you to do something in the shooting phase, the battle magic. It potentially
Yep.
allows you to have sub movement utility, which is why so many armies and generals will default to that because it's a good choice.
I will say that I do love playing Demonology and Dark Magic. They're not as strong, but I do love them. And they almost feel like they were designed for Warriors of Chaos. Like the Steed of Shadows, great to just say, here,
Hmm.
I've got all of these warriors I'm going to throw at you. Boom, they flew forever away. That's awesome. Or Dark Magic, Infernal Gateway. You just teleporting your characters around, moving them to new positions. Awesome, love it. But Arcade Urgency is just, ugh, so
Really,
it,
really good.
it's Occam's razor. It's just the simplest solution to any problem. Just move twice.
And it's typically just more effective. It's typically in almost every situation. So there are some times where the other spells are more effective, but Arcane Urgency is almost always applicable. So that's why
Yeah.
we see that. But anyway, so still great lores, still great Sorcerer Lord. Love seeing him. There's a reason why we see him on the battlefield, and super effective. Definitely don't leave home without one or a Demon Prince or somebody who's going to be casting some spells for your Chaos Army.
Yeah, and dispelling as well, right?
Defense, magic defense is definitely critical, and they definitely have one of, if not the best magic defense items in the game once we get there.
Oh, the Falcon Horn?
No, not that.
Okay, so now we talk about the mount options.
Hmm.
So, a couple of weird things here. First of all, the Demonic mount is a monstrous cavalry mount, and that is
Mm.
pretty impactful because it means that you can then join units of like dragon ogres and stuff if you mount yourself on this, whereas normally no one else would really be able to do that.
Hmm.
You can also
Hmm.
join. So generally, you see people build a big skin wolf Death Star in like Wolves of the Sea stuff like that on demonic mount, or even you're still cavalry, so you could just join Marauder cavalry, but be on this thing. Why not? Right?
Yep.
It's just like 20
Hmm.
more points to get another wound and a couple more attacks.
Hmm.
But usually it's to help you join units. Even Chaos Lords, because their stat line is so crazy, sometimes you see them on demonic mounts when they're just going to be in a
Absolutely.
big unit.
Hmm.
If ever anyone says, okay, we're going to limit you to not allowed to be spend more than so many points on any individual characters, well, you're going to see a lot more demonic mount guys. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the biggest things going around has been the either TOs have been doing it on their own at events, or there's been rumors that GW would release some sort of match play pack at some point where they would say, even in the 2000 standard 2000 point game, you couldn't spend more than 500 points on a character. And you could see how quickly, if you take a Chaos Lord, put him on a dragon, give him any kind of upgrades, boom, you're going to break that 500 point threshold real quick, which is why we're saying if you're going to an event that does restrict how many points you can spend on the characters. Or if GW does at some point release some sort of match play packet that becomes widely adopted by the community, that is something to consider, that we're going to see less dragons and more variety. And that actually might be really healthy and exciting to see, push generals to be more creative in what they're bringing onto the battlefield.
So then we also have Chaos Steeds. So something you don't see here is you don't see two different kinds of horse. There's not like the armored knight horse and like a regular, lighter horse. So when your sorcerer rides a Chaos Steed, he's heavy cavalry, which means he then cannot join a unit of Marauder cavalry in skirmish formation. They have to be all ranked up for him to join them because then there would be two
Hmm.
different unit types. New players screw this up all the time, and that's fine. But yeah, you wouldn't be
Easy
able to run in
mistake.
skirmish. And that's one of the weakest parts of this whole army because being in skirmish as a wizard is very, very useful. And also, if you run around solo, the only way you can not be targeted is if there's a unit that has 5 or more models within 3 inches of you, which is often harder to do when you're cavalry in a very elite army. You might have a unit of 4 knights. Well, that's not enough anymore for you to hide behind them, right?
Yeah. Well, you've seen that we just went over it, Evan. They're wearing chaos armor. A normal horse can't hold up, a
Yeah, that's
giant
true.
Chaos Lord or Wizard in Chaos armor. You got to have the big, Clydesdale on, with the Chaos, the Barded Steed. So, I mean, that makes sense to me. But I think, yes, to your point is, there were potentially more options for more light cavalry or more Marauder characters or lighter entries here, and that is not present in this list at the time. They definitely added a few more potentials in some of the arcane journals, and we'll talk about that in the future. But the default list really doesn't have that, and so that is a limitation for your flexibility of movement and that you positioning that you want to do with your sorcerer.
Yeah. So we also see Chaos Chariots and Gorby's Chariots only for the Chaos Lord, the melee guys. But the Chaos Chariot, I think, is actually a really interesting mount for the Sorcerer Lord.
Hmm.
It gives you toughness
Hmm.
5, it gives you 4 extra wounds, and you can cast in a 360-degree line of sight. It's kind of like having a
Awesome.
unit of 4 knights to hang out with, but actually being able to see in all the directions you want to. I think
Hmm.
I would do this, and I'm not sure why people don't do it as much. I think it's a points thing, or because again, if the Chaos Chariot itself has Mark of Tzeentch, does that mean you get the cast bonus? I don't know whether it's unit strength or
No,
models, right? It's because unit strength 5, it would be unit strength 5, but is it that number of models?
you haven't joined a unit. That's
Uh,
just your same model, so that
oh,
still
I
wouldn't
see.
work.
So the
And I think
wording is just that
models.
you're not going to get it.
Yeah, you just wouldn't get it. So I think it's great. And to your point, I think it's just people see the points of buying a Chaos Chariot in terms of all those points. Like, well, I don't want my sorcerer to get into combat. Therefore, it's just cheaper to put him on a Demonic Steed or have him run around on its own. It's a pretty big point sink to do that. I think that's why we don't see it.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say, if you're going to not take a Mark of Tzeentch wizard, stick him on a chariot. Like if you're going to take a Mark of Nurgle wizard because you want to have your whole army be Mark of Nurgle, then chariot, right?
And to
That's what
be
I'm
fair,
saying.
the Chaos Chariots are some of the best chariots in the game, and they're toughness
Yeah.
5. They're awesome, and they have a good armor save too. I love the Chaos Chariots, but we're not seeing a ton of them on the field of battle currently. I think we might see more in the future, but as of yet, we haven't seen them widely adopted. I myself have 3 Chaos Chariots plus a Chaos Lord on a chariot. I love them,
Yeah, they're
but
enormous.
they have limitations, but I think their models are super cool. I've made some custom kit bashes with some the old school chariot plus some AOS models. They're so awesome. But again, it wasn't a super meta focused list. It was just this is super cool to field them on the battlefield, and I think they're a lot of fun.
All right, so let's jump to the monstrous options. First, we have the Manticore. So the Manticore is a lighter monster. It's more of in the it's not a behemoth. It's a monstrous creature. It's got strength 5, and pretty much if you're not the wizard, you're gonna be toughness 5, right? You're just using your normal toughness. Gives you 4
Hmm.
wounds. That's pretty good. I mean, it's not awful, and it's really cheap. It's less than half the cost of the dragon. So if there's ever a points limit per character, then a Manticore is a good option. It has still has the AP2 melee attacks, and it can get frenzy on itself when you fail a leadership test, which is hilarious. I love that. And then so that'll give itself more attacks. But again, when you only have D3 stomps and you only have flying 9, so it's slower than the bigger creature. Don't ask me how that works. It's just not quite the same weight class. This is essentially like
No,
a
it's
griffin, right?
not. Yeah, the Manticore really hovers in that either it's the higher end of the light side of monsters or the lower end of the medium side of the monsters. But again, if you're still looking for, you could still put a Beatstick Chaos Lord on a Manticore and be crazy effective in what you're going into. Do you want to face other dragons? No, but putting them on the Manticore makes you very fast. It has Swift Stride still. It hits really hard, still
If you
retaining
have
the
Mark of
minus
Nurgle and the
2
Ogre Blade, I
AP.
think you can still take a lot of dragons. I think you're probably okay.
Yeah, he's super powerful. So again, it's just all just relative, and this comes back towards I think we're not seeing as many of them because the dragon is such a compelling option for players. I think if at some point we see that points restriction, I think we're going to see a lot more Chaos Lords on Mana Cores in the future.
All right, and then the other option is the dragon. So it does make you toughness 6 when you're the Chaos Lord. The
Mm-hmm.
dragon goes from again. The last monster was strength 5. This one's strength 7. So
Mm.
that means that you're not just decking, infantry and stuff. You're also saying, oh, hey, that Manticore, I'm gonna wound you on a 2+.
Mm-hmm.
Ouch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm gonna wound you on 2+s not just with my claws. Oh no no. I'm also gonna wound you on 2+s with all my stomp attacks too.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh. Very
Super
scary.
powerful.
It does have 2 heads. That's really fun. It gives you two different breath weapons that almost nobody ever uses, but I love. Whenever I have an excuse to be like, oh, it's a breath weapon, I'm so excited. I'm so happy about it. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean they're cool, but they're just you can't. I think the biggest thing is you can't use them in combat like you could in previous editions, which is why we just don't see them happening as much. And you want to get this guy into combat. You don't want to be
yeah.
outside of combat. I think that's why we rarely see them
So
being
mainly
used.
you're getting the 6 wounds and the 6 attacks and the stomps. Um, all of that together
Huge.
means that you can go into pretty much any unit and either kill it or it doesn't kill you, and you'll win combat from all of the different things you smash to death. That's the idea. It's so guaranteed, is why it's so good. So for 165 extra points over a Manticore, you guarantee success, right? And so this is an army that
Yeah,
already seems like it goes down the route of I'm going to spend more points to just automatically win. So this is just that on steroids.
and it's not it's not a guarantee, but it certainly is pretty close to it. You're not wrong about that. Like the odds are greatly in your favor, and like we said, if you want to make the most powerful single character model unit combo in the game, the Chaos Lord and the Chaos Dragon is exactly how you're going to do that. That being said, top players know how to counter this, whether they're taking monstrous killing blow, whether they're taking magic to control it and make it so it's not really earning its points throughout the game, whether they are taking screamless and screaming this thing to death. There are counters to this thing, but most players, especially newer players, are not prepared to deal with it, and you can steamroll someone's entire army just with this character if they're just not ready for it.
Very true. If someone is totally new and you have this, you will very likely kill their entire army with it on accident.
It's going to be a short game. Yeah.
Because it's all about moving at that point. This is the queen in chess, and if the other person doesn't react, the queen will take out one piece a turn forever, and then they'll win. So
Hmm.
it's all about how do you position your pieces so that their queen doesn't do that, right?
Hmm.
Okay. There are other monsters that we're going to get to in the unit section, but now it's time to go to all of the special stuff that Chaos get to do. I think the first thing is the gifts. So this is useful to talk about before the weapons because we know about things like the
Hmm.
common magic items and stuff. But the gifts of Chaos, each character can buy. Can they buy more than one? They can buy more than one,
I
right?
think I think it was a points
Yeah,
limits,
you have
right?
a points limit, so you can buy more than one. It's pretty rare to do that, but
Yeah, you can only choose it once per army, though.
yes.
That's what the restriction is. But again, it's pretty rare that you would want to choose more than one. I mean, typically, you're either taking like Diabolic Splendor is one of the most common ones, quite frankly. You could take some of the others. Well, let's go through it. Let's talk about them.
Right. So you have a lot of cool little
They're
options in
expensive.
here. They're very rarely seen except for essentially what is it? Just Enchanting Aura. Enchanting Aura is seen almost every single time, and the reason why is
That's
because
it.
it gives you anyone in base contact can't use strikes first, and they're subject to strikes last. So it means I don't care if you charge me nana nana nana. I hit you first. Now people almost exclusively put this on a dragon, who is the unit in your army who needs this the least. I don't understand this, but I haven't played that many Warriors of Chaos players who use this yet. But I think that this is an amazing ability to stick on some kind of unit of infantry or cavalry so that you always get to fight first. That'd be great because those guys die and don't step up, right? The
Well,
dragon lives.
it can be effective on a demon prince. The reason why you're going to see this on the dragon character is because they're trying to counter the people who are taking the monster slayer swords. So they're like, well, you could potentially kill me with your monster slaying sword, but if I make it so you go last, I'm betting that my chaos lord plus my dragon's attacks will kill you before you ever get the chance to use it against me. So they are not just doubling, they are tripling down on trying to make the most powerful thing in the game be as invulnerable as they can make it. That's what they're trying to accomplish when they
Yeah,
do
that's
that.
dumb though.
Um, well, I can tell you this: we've seen a lot less chaos players win top tier lists over the last 6 9 months. And we saw a whole bunch more of them at the beginning. So again, those top level players have absolutely learned how to deal with this combo in many different ways, including just making sure that they feed it things where it just doesn't earn its points back over the course of the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, so kind of at the top, just going through real quick. Dark Majesty is really cool, but for 50 points, again, the -1 to the leadership for Fear and Terror tests, again, it's just too contextual, which is why I think we just don't see it coming to play that often. And I think it's for the points cost. Again, if that was like a 25 points, I think we would see it a lot. But for 50 points, it also means you're not going to get some of the other powers here, which is why, again, contextually and high points cost, we just don't see it used that often. And again, you could face things like undead armies that just don't care. So suddenly you took a power that's pretty irrelevant to the entire game. So that's the problem with that. Demon Flesh, 45 points. Again, this character cannot be wounded on a roll of 2. Did you just look at our stats of what a Chaos Lord is, especially if it's on a dragon? That would almost never happen anyway. So again, just the frequency this would be applicable. And then the problem is if you want to put on like a chaos character who's on foot, a sorcerer or something, well, you don't want to dump 45 points into that, more into that character for it contextually if they get into combat. If this it's just too expensive for the characters that you would want to put it on, which is why I believe we
You
don't
might
see it.
see it on the Chaos Lord on a mana core if people are suddenly limited to, let's say, 500 points per character. So if they can't take a dragon, then they might take this. Because then if you're toughness 5, you're very often wounded on 2s. Because a lot of things in the
True,
game are strength 7.
but then you're choosing between this versus the enchanting aura, and the enchanting aura is typically going to win, which is typically the problem we're seeing here. These are so expensive in points, you're typically putting one on a character at most, in which case then is anything better than enchanting aura? And often the answer is no, because of the points costs. Extra arm is cool, like +1 to attack is great, but 40 points for one attack, that's a really expensive attack.
Well, when you have
Which
an
is why I
Ogre
think
Blade,
we
that's
don't see it.
probably worth it.
Yeah, but you could also argue if you have an ogre blade, do you need it? Right?
Yes.
So
I would do this every time. I would do this every single time.
um
But that's also just
so
because I like
so
rolling more
again,
dice. So
you do like rolling dice, but we don't see that too often in the meta. But
no.
again, it's a good ability, but it's just really pricey. Diabolic Splendor, um, shooting phase -1 to hit modifier.
So
Um,
I think that
hmm.
people should be taking this on the dragon instead because it might help push people out of being able to poison you anymore.
That is true for the poison, but again, I think more often than not in the game, we're seeing less armies that are bringing mass poison to the battlefield, and more armies that are bringing wizards to shoot you on the battlefield. And the wizard automatically hits with his spells when he's shooting at you anyway. And the reality is, if you don't have poison, if you have anything else in the game, bows or things that require ballistic skill, often it's just a waste to shoot at the dragon because it is so hard to hit the thing, wound the thing, get past its armor save, ward save, often regen save as well. So
Yeah.
again, just the occurrences where this is applicable is very few because there are very few ballistic skill based weapons that would even attempt to shoot the dragon because it's a waste of your firepower, which is why I
Also,
think
the
we
other
just
thing
don't
that's
see that.
really annoying is that Tomb Kings are just like, I don't care. And Tomb Kings are one of the main things I want this against.
Right, and they're just like, whatever,
So I
I'm up,
really
here
think
we
Arrows
go.
of Asaph needs to be changed so it's only like the core rulebook minuses to hit, not like if I have a magical minus to hit, I think you need to deal with that, okay? Like just chill, you know what I'm saying? But
Well,
no,
they're
Arrows
like,
of
we
Asaph
have
is just broken.
magical. I don't know about that, but yeah. So again, it's a cool ability, but contextually, it's just not applicable that often. We already talked about enchanting aura. There's a reason why it's taken. It is one of the most powerful things here, and it's so useful in multiple combinations of different characters, which I just love it. It's such a cool ability and really fun. Aura of Pain, right? Same thing. Choose the fight phase. So first of all, it's fight phase only, and then you select it. A single enemy unit that engaged suffers D6 strength 3 hits with no armor regen. Again, it could potentially come into play, but not necessarily, and it's only strength 3, right? So
So
it's not.
Empire Knights that have 2 plus armor save and are toughness 3 hate this one trick.
Yeah, so you're gonna take. Are you? But if you're a chaos character, are you really worried
What if
about
you're a
Empire
Chaos
Knight?
Wizard who's on a horse and he just got charged by a couple of knights and now he's saying, nah, you all die?
Maybe you probably did something wrong if he's being charged by those knights, is my answer to that. So again, it's just not going to be super
So
applicable that
nobody plays
often.
these ones. That's what I was starting off with. But I'm saying there, there, there's not necessarily a
Yeah,
reason that they don't play them. You could play them.
you could, but
Yeah.
people don't because enchanting aura is just so good. And again, typically, you. your points on your characters go so high so fast.
That's
You
true.
don't have a ton of extra points, and you're going to be spending those points on some of the best magic items in the game as well, in addition to any mount upgrades you might have. So anyway, we could go on from there, but pretty
For sure.
straightforward. So again, cool abilities, too contextual for the points costs.
I will just say though that these are the kind of things that make people fall in love with Warhammer. Being like, I really want to make my very specific, unique guy, and I don't care if it's a tiny little percent and less strong than everybody else. And that's why I'm just trying to point out that there are these edge cases where it's like, if you know how the game works, you're a really good player. You just take something that you think is cool.
Hmm. Yep.
Like Master Immortals, right? Unless you're fleeing Marauders and Marauder Horsemen get +1 of their leadership nearby, that's pretty pointless, but it's really thematic. If you want to be like I am, Wolfric the Wanderer, and I'm leading all my Marauder guys out of the wilderness, like bring it on. I'm not wearing a shirt. You got to buy this item. You know.
Yeah. And my favorite is when we do see people who are taking these and building thematic armies who customize their models to represent demonic flesh or to represent the extra arm, and they put another arm on their character. It's just so cool. So yeah, in terms of the meta chasers, maybe not as much creativity here, but in terms of the people who are building thematic armies, so much potential for just making really cool, unique models, and I love that.
So you can turn your character into an alien or a xenomorph from Alien with acidic or
Or poisonous slime, right? You've seen some nasty Nurgle character. I love it. It's so cool.
yeah. So the only thing is that people often forget poison attacks cannot go onto a magic weapon if you take it. So you can't have poison attacks and also buy a magic weapon and use both. So that means if you buy this, you then have to use a mundane weapon, which is
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so
but a
let's
great
look at
weapon
the
is mundane. That still hurts.
yeah. So let's look at the item options that they have. First off, we have a sword that's 1,000,000 points, which it generally means no one ever plays this ever except me. I play these kind of things for fun.
Yeah.
I don't even know what this does. I have no idea.
It has basically almost every rule you can put on a sword, but it is actually a very good sword. The problem is for 75 points, you compare it to the Ogre Blade. That's not 75 points. Everyone picks the Ogre Blade. That's the problem.
So I think my problem with it is actually that the extra attacks D3. Can I not get higher than 10 attacks? Like if I've juiced my profile up with extra arm and I've rolled the result on Gaze the Gods a bunch of times, if I get extra attacks +3 and I already had 8 to start with, does it cap out at 10 or can that actually go above 10? Because I just want to have a lot of attacks.
I don't believe attacks caps out. I can look,
Because your
but
stat does, but does the extra attacks rule improve your stat or does it improve your number of things?
it's a great question. I don't know.
It does have strikes first, and it's AP too. Like
Yeah, it's a good weapon. It's just expensive.
that's really cool. There's so many. You remember,
Of
Mike?
course,
You
you
were
can.
saying, hey, the Demon Prince. If you want to build a melee Demon Prince, maybe you take
Mhm.
this because then you
Don't
have
forget
enough
the
attacks
notes.
to
It
be consistent.
has downside.
Yeah, I'm not going to read that because I don't. That's never going to happen to me. When you
You're
roll when
never
you
gonna
roll
roll
one to
once.
hit, the unit the wielder has joined get takes a hit. Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, but the Demon Prince does have a lot of saves.
Hmm. Oh, it's
So
super cool. You want to make just a badass demon prince with a badass sword? This is a way to go.
that is really risky. Wow. Yeah, he's very likely to hurt himself a lot. I guess it depends on whether you could. You know what you have to do? You have to give yourself hatred as well. So you have to give yourself battle lust so that you can reroll all your ones and not get any.
Mhm.
And
And
then
you know
hit
what
with.
awesome weapon you don't have to hurt yourself with? Ogre Blade.
Yeah, but you
That's
only. But
this.
Mike, you were the one who was telling me you only have the 5 attacks. You go in there, you just miss, and you're like, oh, oops, and then you pop from combat res,
Mhm.
right? This one,
That is typically the problem.
more
Yes,
attacks, Mike, more attacks.
you're not wrong. It has the potential. I'll still roll those ones and twos and then hurt myself on those ones, but that's a me problem.
Oh, man, I want to do this now. Okay, so we have the Chaos Rune Sword. Well, you get +1 weapon skill. That's actually huge because the person who is going to buy this probably needs it. Like, if you have the Exalted Champion and he's weapon skill 6, I don't. I think that's like pretty worth it.
No,
Like,
you could go above 10. So for characteristics, it says all characteristics are from 0 to 10. they cannot go below 0, and only in the rarest of cases will they raise above 10.
Oh, so they
So,
can.
yeah, they can go above 10. Yep. There were hard caps on 10 in previous editions. And again, I don't think anything has above 10 in a base profile for any stat, even
Okay.
movement, leadership, anything. But you can if you have ways to stack it, so you could get
So
above
a
10 attacks.
battle-lusted demon prince who has cast battle lust on himself. Right, I already said that.
With,
And he has the
with an
extra
extra
arm.
arm,
So then he'll have 7 attacks base. This gives him D3 more, so that can go up to 10. And if we gaze at the gods ourselves and we end up rolling the 5, we could start getting more than 10 on the charge.
yeah, that's a scary demon
And
prince.
it strikes first, so you can just sit there being like, "You want to charge me? Are you sure?
Hmm.
Are you sure about
Hmm.
that?" And guess
Super
what?
scary.
You only have to hurt yourself with it if someone chooses to risk being whacked in the face by it, right? You're forcing them to roll the dice. You're saying, "You actually want to see if I'm going to hurt you?" You know?
I love it. It's so chaos. I love it. Anyway, so let's move on from this sword that we never see anyone take, but it is an awesome sword.
Yeah, again, the reason why no one ever plays these is because there's Ogre Blade exists, but I also think ban the Ogre Blade. So,
Well, I don't think it's about banning the Ogre Blade. I think it's about a rebalance of some points adjustments, and suddenly we're going to see a lot more variety.
well, you know that there are certain people on the internet who talk all the time about how they have to have an event where you're forced to bring your most expensive magic sword, and I will sign up. I won't play Empire because the Rune Fang is terrible, terrible beyond. Unless if it's free. If you say, Mike, okay, everyone gets to bring your most expensive faction unique weapon for free, you just throw it on there. Then I'll play
I think
Empire.
we are getting off base from the Wars of Chaos book.
No, we're not. Anyway, the Filth Mace is another weapon no one uses. So this is one of those funny things where you can make people take a toughness test, and if they fail it, they get lower toughness. But a lot of people are just like, yeah, but I have 7 attacks because I'm a Demon Prince or a Chaos Lord, and I just killed you already. So why do I need to lower your toughness? Like,
Exactly right.
I don't know. It's a really cool idea, but it's like, how are you going to go hit somebody and then run away so you can then shoot them with arrows because now they're lower toughness? I
Exactly
don't
right.
know what the.
That's part of the problem is these weapons that reduce the stats and profiles of other characters really only come into play in subsequent turns, and and you're
Oh,
hitting
this
them
one's only
so
its turn.
hard. Oh, there you go. So it's just that like
Oh,
these lowering stats of enemies just don't come into play that
right, and
often.
guess what, Mike? It lowers their toughness if they fail a toughness test. So the people with higher toughness are more likely to pass the test.
Yeah,
So the people with lower
it's
toughness,
just
you don't need to lower it.
hmm yeah. Plus, so your attacks, because the problem is you're attacking at the same. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, weird.
Yeah.
Spell Thieving Sword, another one where it's like, if I'm in combat with your wizard, I'm going to steal a spell from you so you forget it. But why isn't the
Hmm.
wizard just dead, though?
Yep.
And look, this would be really cool if you charge in there and you have Enchanting Aura or something, and you steal Spectral Doppelganger from the Vampire Lord or from the from the Keeper of Secrets before it gets to use it on you. That would be great.
Yeah.
But I don't know why you need to do that.
Yeah. Again, if this was something that you could do as a ranged attack or some other way, but it's just again the frequency that this would come into play is just not common.
Pretty wacky.
Hmm.
Um, to be honest, I'm reading these items and I'm like, wow, you don't see any of this stuff. The Armor of the Damned, full plate for 70 points that they have to reroll to hit against you. I mean, you already have a word save for free. You could have full plate, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, it's like, who are you putting this on? You could put it on a Demon Prince, but you already got a 4 board save and a regen save. Are you going to dump this on a Chaos Sorcerer? No, he's just too many points on top of already making him a level 4. And then if you're a Chaos Lord, you already got full play already. Again, it's too many points for the things you would put it on, which is why we don't see it. It's great, but it's just not worth the points. Versus, I'll just take my Chaos Lord and give him the Mark of Nurgle, and it's
Right.
way cheaper and just makes more sense.
Then we have one that's here, so it's locked to certain unit types. It's heavy armor, which means guess what? It either downgrades your armor to make it worse, or it's exactly the same thing you're already wearing. Ew.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just makes you immune to multiple wounds, which is really cool. I think that maybe people will take this a bit more if they have the guys riding the monstrous cavalry, the demonic
Yep.
mounts, because multi wounds. When you have less than 10 wounds, because the Chaos Lord on Dragon has 10, but if you have
Mhm.
not 10, you really don't like getting hit with multi wounds. and everyone has
Yep.
it constantly all the time in your face. It's fairly annoying, actually.
Hmm.
So,
Absolutely. So I think we will see more of this in the future. I really do. Yep.
so Crown of Everlasting Conquest you do see because it gives you regen. Now, it is 40 points. The Seed of Rebirth is
Hmm.
20 points and does that.
Yeah, but the
So,
Seed of Rebirth is on an elf. This is on a Chaos Lord.
very true. And this guy usually has the 10 wounds. So, the only problem, and again, this is probably the main problem with it, is you can't take this and the Ogre Blade. And
Yep.
I don't think the Chaos Lord actually has that many issues not dying.
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason. So again, typically you'll either see players will go all in on defense with their Chaos Lord, and they will take this because they want to go ultra defense, or they're going to go more all in offense, and then they wouldn't take this because they'd rather spend those points on the better weapon. So it just depends on how people are building their Chaos Lords, right? Typically, the most common builds we're going to see is all offense in terms of the Ogre Blade, or all defense, and then they'll take something like the Monster Slaying Sword because the Dragon and the Lord hit hard enough on their own, and they'll take the monstrous killing blow, and they'll just make their character as defensible as possible. So those are typically the most common combos we're going to see out there.
So then we have the Brazen Collar. Now, this is one of the items that thematically is supposed to be like Mark of Corn only, because these are the
Yep.
collars of Corn. But in the rules, it's just like, nah, do whatever you want. And it actually irks me a lot that you can have the Enchantigora, which is a Slaanesh thing. You can buy a Brazen Collar, which is a Corn thing, and you can take Mark of Nurgle, and you can just be like, can't hit me. Can't hit me. It's
Yeah,
like,
well, I think that's the version of, remember, in this edition in the lore and such, they're not even aware, even though it
no.
says in the book this mark of that. They in terms of the canon right now, they're not even aware necessarily that these are the actual chaos gods and full understanding of what they're
Sure.
worshiping. They just know
Then
their
make it less
powers
strong,
and
though.
such. Well, you're not wrong about that. But I think, yes, the biggest thing is people love the themes of the four chaos gods. They're
Yeah,
so cool. They're so iconic. They have
right.
great models, both in human form and demon form. They're amazing. And people love to make themed lists that this is the list dedicated to this god. This is the list dedicated to that god. I actually find less common are people saying, I want an amalgamation list. And more often than not, we see people wanting to dedicate their army and theme and paint them up to one specific god and one really big flavor. And the rules as they're written right now are not as supportive of that as what previous editions had supported. And I think that's one of the biggest asks from the community is, please, going forward, whether it's later this edition or the next edition, please allow more
Well,
rules that support being dedicated to one chaos god.
and they can't make the mistake. So it's a common mistake to say, okay, to do that, we'll just make it so you can't do all these combos and you have to pigeonhole yourself. Like, for example, the Heralds of Darkness list, where it's like you have to have a mark on a character and a mark on a unit. They have to like line up, which then makes everyone go, oh. Ugh.
Yeah.
And so you have to give someone a bonus for going down the route instead of a negative
Mhm.
for or a total restriction of forcing them saying you have to. You just have to say, no, if you do go down the route of this theme, you get some kind of a bonus. That'd be cool.
Yeah, and it's just, again, it's a positive reinforcement rule system versus a negative reinforcement rule system, and so I think we'll probably see versions of that in the future. I don't know that we're going to see it in edition one that we're in of the old world, but I'm pretty confident from the community's ask and output and feedback to the rules writers. I bet you we're going to see something like that in addition to.
Banner of the Gods, ignore all negative modifiers to leadership. If you know for a fact your friend plays vampire counts, okay. It is a jillion points though.
Hmm. Yeah,
Ow. Okay.
yeah, it just doesn't come into play that often for the number of points.
So I'm gonna take my unit of Chaos Chosen Knights and I'm gonna give them Banner of the Gods, and now, oh no, they're 900 points. Oops.
Yep, not worth it.
The Doom Totem though, my friend plays this all the time. So if they can see him on with their line of sight, they get -1 leadership. It's
Hmm.
not worth 65 points, but it is really funny to be like, you could see me, you could see me.
Yeah, it is. It is a really cool combo, and I think players can do a lot of creative, clever
Ugh.
things with it. And I think it happens a lot. But again, it's you have to build a list that's trying to stack this combo for it with other things that are reducing leadership for it to come into play. And it's really fun when it works, and it's super fun and creative and exciting. And then you roll up to the Two Kings player who just doesn't care. So again, that's the problem with building lists that are leadership focused in terms of your strategy and tactics, and then you run into armies that don't care about leadership. That's the problem.
Um, so Blast Descender, you get to reroll ones for armor saves against shooting. That's a lot of points, but I think that people sometimes take this on their Chaos Chosen Knights because you have a 2+ armor save. A lot of shooting has AP 0. So if people just throw a bunch of arrows at you and you just happen to roll a 1, you're like, God, that Chaos Chosen Knight is like 70 points each, and if I just get to
Yeah.
re-roll it, okay, you know,
Yeah. 70 points each or whatever the actual cost is, which is very high. And with one wound. That's the pain point.
Yeah, so 40 points, reroll ones on shooting
Yep.
only. Maybe. Okay. And then Banner of Rage is really cool because it gives you unit Frenzy, so you can kind of have a
hmm
different mark and also get Frenzy. And they
hmm
can't lose the Frenzy, so I think you see that sometimes. However, I think that Frenzy is one of my least favorite rules in the game to have on my own units. I'm like, oh god, no, please. Please stop. It hurts. Because
Yeah.
basically, when you bring a Frenzied unit, you brought a unit for your opponent to get to play. They get to choose where it's going
Yeah.
to go. They get to choose what it's going to do. And if they're actually playing correctly, the Frenzied unit doesn't do what you want it to do at all.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge, in particular with the chaos lists, who you want to see the frenzy most on them. They're very thematic, but part of the challenge is it's a very expensive elite army, so you do not have a ton of throwaway units or a whole bunch of buffer units typically in order to shepherd or to guide your big, heavy hitting, expensive units into combat. Because it's an elite army. You don't have that many models, so you're very exposed in that sense, and also you don't have the same level of movement or flexibility or utility that you see in other armies, which is exactly the problem. So, out of all the armies that have Frenzy, while it has the most potential to do the most damage in the Chaos Elite army, and also you have the fewest tools to defend yourself against your opponent using it against you.
Yeah, I will also say what the worst possible thing you can do is have a single unit in your army that has Frenzy, because then the other person gets to go, oh, cool, I have this little Great Eagle, I'm just going to stick in front of you. If you're going to have Frenzy, then have like 3 or 4 units that have Frenzy, so they at the very least can't just focus and pick on that one school kid who's got lice and just rub his face in it,
Yeah.
right? You gotta have,
Like you
everyone's
say,
gotta have lice.
3 or 4 units with Frenzy, suddenly that could be your half of your entire army with a Chaos army. So it
Right.
just depends.
I do often, though, bake into my own armies the idea of, okay, if you're Frenzy, I'm gonna have some fun. So I often bring stuff that can counter
Yeah.
that.
So great for a fun list, not necessarily a meta list, but super fun and thematic, especially if you're making that just awesome corn list. I love it.
So the Pendant of Damnation, again, I don't know. Oh, so you get +1 attack for each wound you lose, but you don't have that many wounds to lose. So
And if you're losing wounds, you're in trouble already.
also, you're gonna lose more wounds if you spend points on items like this instead of on points on items that help you not die or help you kill people.
hmm
Right? Or you could just have +1 attack all the time by just buying extra arm instead.
Yep. And Helm in Many Eyes, this actually is a newer version of an item we used to see in every single Chaos list in previous editions, but now we don't see it nearly as much.
Well, I think that you see this on the Wolves of the Sea Chaos character champion so that he can have strikes first in the duel. That's where you see it.
Yep.
That's pretty much it. And then that whole unit is then useless during the battle most of the time. It's very sad. They're just walking around like, oh, we're stupid. Ugh.
Yep.
Favor of the Gods. Now, 5 points. So, it's so cheap. And it just means, oh, you know one of the best rules in the game that has very little downside anyway? What if we just let you re-roll it whenever you didn't get the result you want?
Yeah, and that's the problem with the Gaze of the Gods table. We mentioned before, the upsides are so good, and the downsides are being stupid is really the only big downside, and you have to roll a 1. But for 5 points, I mean, you just take a couple of these on your Lord for a very few points, and suddenly it just never becomes applicable to the game whatsoever. So that's the challenge of that. At the same time, you want the Gaze of the Gods table to be a more pros than cons, because you want players to want to roll on the table. But the problem is suddenly the risk of rolling on the table, it is so cheap to basically just remove the risk from ever being applicable. Everybody just takes it. Suddenly there is no downside to the table. So it's like they tried to balance it when they first made the table, and then immediately unbalanced it by a very small points investment.
Well, it's balanced in Beastmen because they don't have this item.
Yeah, they do not. No, they don't. Yep.
So, Mike, you have a dragon. You really want to charge. You roll
yeah.
Gaze of the Gods and you roll a 1. You're stupid. Guess
Yep.
what?
That
You
hand.
already passed the phase where you have to roll the stupidity test. So on this turn, you don't have to roll it yet. You can roll it later.
Yep.
So on the last
And
turn of the
that's the
game,
other.
you can always roll this, and who cares?
Yep, that's the other problem of even when you do fail, even if you rolled a one and then use this and rolled a one again, it's not going to be applicable to the turn that you roll it on. Because really the biggest thing it's preventing from is not being able to charge. That's because you could still cast spells if you were a wizard.
It should be that
Um,
if you roll a 1, you suffer as if you are stupid that turn. Not that you will then have to take stupidity later on your leadership 9 character.
yeah,
Like, if you just.
if it was you immediately suffered the effects of
Yeah,
stupidity,
yeah.
that would be a completely different situation. But that's not
And
what
then the
it
reroll would
says.
be less egregious because the downside would actually be bad.
That would be a pretty big. That would be a pretty meaningful downside if you immediately suffer the effects of stupidity. But that's not what it is.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep rewriting the game in my head.
That's okay. Let's move on though. I
So
think
we have
we've talked
arcane
about that
items,
at
and we
length.
have 3 arcane items where you see 2 of them, because one of them's common, so you can just buy them on every single guy. That's the spell familiar. So the Warriors of Chaos and Vampire Counts are like the 2, factors in the game that just say, hey, every wizard have another free spell. Cool. And one of the
I
amazing
like
things
these
about
spells.
that is it makes your level 4 have 5 spells, which means that you basically almost guarantee to get the spells you want instead of the 4 out of 6, which is a big risk.
Yep. Of course, you say that, and I tell you more often than not, I don't roll the one dice that I want. It just happens. It's still a dice game. But I think the most important thing on this list here, though, is the Infernal Puppet. This is, if not, it is definitely top 3 best items in the game, in my opinion. It is so powerful. So, Evan, what does the Infernal Puppet do besides make your opponent sad?
No, the main thing it does is tell your opponent that they don't get to have any fun this game because their wizards are going to be blowing themselves up more than hurting you.
Yeah, yeah. So the Infernal Puppet, right? It has. So if you're within your dispel range, you put this on your level 4 Sorcerer Lord, which you will. So if you're within his 24-inch dispel range, not hard if you put him around the centerish of the table. So basically, he'll be within range of the enemy wizards. And anytime they wish to cast a spell, they roll an extra d6. Okay, but then they discard the highest die of the 3 dice.
Yeah.
So it just reduces the odds of you getting your spells off significantly. It's not about you're going to blow yourself up with miscasts all the time, but it
It triples the
really,
chance of you getting a miscast result.
yeah, it just the odds, it just reduces the odds of you casting your spells significantly.
It
And it's
reduces
on not
the average.
a cast,
Yeah, it
every cast.
reduces your casting roll by about 2. So instead of rolling on average, let's say an 11 on a level 4 wizard, you instead of roll an average a 9. So if you have a spell that's a 10 plus to cast, now that spell goes off less than half the time. It
Yep.
makes you miscast 9% of the time instead of 3% of the time.
And now, if you're rolling on average, you're going to get less higher results on average because you're removing the highest die. That means even if you do get it off, it's easier for that level 4 who you're within range of to now dispel your spell as well. So again, it is the most effective item in the game at shutting down spells. And again, I think they were doing this because again, Chaos is an elite army. It doesn't necessarily participate in all the phase. We talked about control, movement, positioning, or some of its weaker sides, the lack of shooting except for wizards. So I think this is one of their ways to balance it. But certainly, the Bretonian horn is likely overjuiced for what it does in the game, or at least the impact on the opponent's enjoyment of the game. I think it's a little too high. I think it's a little too high on this item as well. Hopefully, we'll see some adjustments to that in the future, but we haven't seen any yet. That being said, Chaos are not winning every event. They haven't for a while. They certainly win quite a few. They won a whole bunch more when we first started this edition, and people didn't know what to deal with the dragon. But this is one of the things that are definitely keeping the Chaos Warriors of Chaos still a very competitive list. This is one of those items that is part of that equation.
Well, in particular, if the enemy army's only plan to deal with your dragon is magic, and you say, no, you can't,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
then
can't
it's
rely on that.
rock,
Of
paper,
course,
scissors where the other person has a rock and paper.
yep, that definitely happens. So, all right, I think we've talked about Infernal Puppet enough. Are
Yeah.
we any more magic items?
No. No, so I think we should talk about the Gaze the Gods, though, because we have alluded to it quite a lot. So every
Yep.
character gets to have this. During the command phase, they get to roll a d6 and consult this table. Now, as we were saying
They
earlier,
may roll a d6.
yeah,
You
you
don't
don't
have
have
to.
to. Although, seems like it's almost always good to do it. It's just hard to remember, and then you have to start stacking all these buffs because result 4, 5, and 6 last for the rest of the game. So then half the time you're just stacking buffs that last for the rest of the entire game, which is very. It gets to be a lot, and you have to have these little tokens to carry around with you to remember what people are at. Um,
Hmm.
if you roll a 1, you have stupidity the rule, but you're not treated as having failed stupidity. You just have it, which means you don't have to take the test until turn 2. So if you fail this on turn 1, just turn 2 you have to worry about it. Turn 1 you can do whatever you want.
Hmm.
Right? If you already have stupidity, you start lowering your leadership. So again, if you roll 1s a lot in a row, very bad, but that's very unlikely to happen.
Hmm. Very unlikely.
And then number 2 and number 3 only last for the current turn, and they only do stuff for combat. So they're basically just if you roll a 2 or a 3 and you're about to charge, cool. But
Yeah, but they're not bad.
yeah,
They're still they're still bonuses. They're just not bonuses that are going to stick with you. They're still
yeah.
good.
So initiative, cool. But if you're currently doing this and you're about to charge or something, then you're already gonna have decent initiative. And toughness is also fine. But one of the things is the toughness is the worst stat to get when you're about to charge because you very often are charging somebody who isn't gonna hurt you. So whatever.
Yeah, it just depends on the situation. But the main thing is that lower half of the table, only the 1 is actual negative. 2 and 3 are still positives.
Yeah. So 2 and 3 generally don't do anything. Just saying. Just
Hmm.
in general, they're not gonna do anything. And then 1 is a downside that you can often reroll.
Yep.
And then 4,
Or it
5, and
doesn't
6.
affect you on the turn that it matters.
Yeah, and then 4, 5, and 6 are just for the rest of the whole game. You have a really great stat. So you have weapon
So
skill
good.
with 4. So then that often starts juicing your characters up to the point where they're like, "Cool, I'm just gonna hit your high elf lord on a dragon on a 3+ now, or your Bretonian duke on a 3+, because they don't. No one else
Hmm.
has a way to increase their weapon skill over the game.
Nope.
So you get to do that. You can have plus
Hmm.
1 attack, my personal favorite, because I just love having a million attacks. Great.
It's awesome. Yep.
And then apotheosis, you get strength and leadership. Let's just give you both at the same time. So
Well, yeah, it's a 6, of course.
yeah, so you can get plus 1 strength, and now your Chaos Lord strength 6, and then leadership 10 at the same time. So if you just roll that 6 on the first turn of the game, now you're leadership 10 army with an 18-inch
Hmm.
character bubble, which is great.
Yeah, but again, the leadership rarely comes into play. It's really about I get the plus 1 strength is huge, right? Suddenly
Well, if your
you're
whole army is gigantic chaos spawns who are immune to psychology and unbreakable, and Forsaken who have stubborn and immune to psychology, then yeah, who cares about leadership?
Mhm. Yeah, but that's okay. But again, as we said, I do love the table. I do love that it exists. It is fun to roll on it. It's very thematic. It's very chaosy. I'm so glad that it exists. I think the table should be favoring more the positive reinforcement than negative reinforcement. You want players to want to roll on the table every turn. Again, we just feel that the downside is too easily mitigated or doesn't come into play when it should come into play when you roll that 1. So I think it could use a couple tweaks that would make the table a lot more interesting and players would still roll on it all the time.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's just, it's just again, it means the more characters you have, the more people are rolling on this table, and then suddenly your aspiring champion hits like a freight train.
Or your Sorcerer Lord. I've seen
Yes.
that plenty of times too, where suddenly he's punching almost as hard as a Chaos Lord. And it's like, woo, go Sorcerer Lord.
Some people play Empire and they take an Empire general and buy an Ogre Blade for that character. He has the same stats as a Sorcerer Lord.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
you know,
but you did pay more for your. Yeah,
but I'm saying a Sorcerer Lord could buy an Ogre Blade and just start rolling on this table and then actually just be better than what other people's best thing is.
I mean, you could. I mean, that's a strategy, not one that I'd recommend, but you could do it.
If you have Demonology,
Again, you could do it. I don't know if it's the best idea, but it certainly is going to make a fun army. All right,
okay.
did we get to the end? Anything else to
Yeah.
go over for characters and items? Oh, just a couple more. The marks.
Oh, the spells, because again, characters are wizards, right? So,
So we already did talk about the marks, so I don't think we need to go over that again. As we said before, right? Khorne is offense, you get the frenzy, Nurgle defense, the sixes, so forth and so on. So all the details are there in case you want to
oh,
see
I
it.
did forget. When you're Mark of Tzeentch, you do get flaming and magical attacks, or flaming and magic resistance 1.
Yeah, I mentioned the magic resistance above, which is still relevant for the demon prince. The flaming attacks, again, I love flaming attacks. They were super impactful in previous editions, not so impactful in this edition. So hopefully we'll see more of an improvement to that later. But they do get the Lords of Chaos. These signature spells are really good, really spicy.
Well, there's one that everyone takes all the time and is very boring because all it does is massacre everything in the game. And then there's all the other cool ones.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's referring to again the Blue Fire of Tzeentch. It is
Yeah,
quite frankly just the best magic missile in the game. There's not much to say. Just D6 plus strength. It's only 9 to cast. 18-inch range is a good range. D6 plus 3 hits, strength 4 with AP -2 and flaming. It is, you know, the if not one of the best magic missile in the game. It's great. And the cool thing is, if you take battle magic, you can have fireball, and you could then default to the signature spell, and then you take the ruby ring and ruin. Suddenly, you're like a fireball machine gun with that wizard.
yeah, absolutely. And if the enemy's army is filled with wood elves or little skirmisher units, things like that, and you're just like, here, I kill one. You can just cast all these magic missiles on all different units.
Hmm.
Unlike arrows, you can split your fire and murder that one. Now I'm going to murder the next one. And then you get several hundred points a turn just by murdering little units that are showing
Yeah.
up, right?
Well, the fact that this is AP2, this one, that's what makes it in particularly so powerful because, like, all right, I'm going to AP2 -2, those 2-up armors saved whatever, and oops,
Yeah.
it's so effective.
On average, this kills like 2 or 3 Empire Knights a turn or something. And you can, and this isn't
Hmm.
your only one. You have multiple of these that are like this that you just stack on top of each other, and then you just start murdering Empire Knights.
Yep. And you just hope that you can kill enough before they get you in combat and your wizard fireball machine gets shut down.
So what are all the spells that everyone doesn't play? Well, the first one is Winds of Chaos. So if you're a Mark of Chaos Undivided, you have a hex that's really long range that can lower
Hmm.
people's movement stat. That's
Hmm.
interesting. Now there's a couple things I thought about doing with this. The first one is if they're a skirmisher, you can lower their movement stat so that when you charge them, they can't all rank up and they die.
Yeah, that's possible.
So if people have a big brick of Sisters of Avalorn and they're in skirmish and they're like, it's fine, I'm movement 5. Well, not if you're movement 2, or drop their movement down to 3, and then they can't all rank up and half the unit dies when you charge
Yep,
them
that's
with the
possible. So
with
again,
war dogs.
hmm yeah, that could happen.
Um, Marcus Slaanesh. So this one's also really, really exciting. So it gives a unit strikes last. I love
Hmm.
this. It's just it has 12-inch range. It's also a casting value I've never seen before. It's only a 6+ to go off. Very, very
Hmm.
cool. So short range is rough, but you know what I really like the idea of is having a Slaanesh wizard who's got enchanting aura, and then he's also just in a unit, and he can just say, you know what, this other unit, I'm also going to make them have strikes last too, and then just charge in there, and everyone gets screwed up basically.
Yep.
I mean, it's a bit problem because you can't target people who are already in combat with it, and it's
Right.
only range 12. And if you're
Yep.
charging them, you
That,
probably strikes first anyway. But if you,
that I
I
think
don't
that's
know.
the point. I think that what this spell really needs to push it over the edge is you can cast it into combat. That's what would make this spell, I think, significantly more applicable because I love everything else about it. And I don't mind that it's short range. So either A, it because it's a hex and it let target enemy comes to less until the end of the combat phase. See, that's the problem. You see, it's short range and you can't cast into the combat. You either need it to be longer range and it remains in play, or you need to be the range it is, and then you can cast into
It also
combat.
only
That's
lasts for your current turn. So in other
yeah.
words, you
Ideally,
have to cast this on a unit, and then you have to charge that unit this turn. Where wouldn't you probably swing before them anyway?
exactly right. So the terms and conditions for where this is applicable is too restrictive. This could use some revision.
So I feel like the biggest time this would come up is if the unit that you're charging either has it's Sword Masters of Hoeth, who are initiative 7 when you charge them, or if they have strikes first, right? Or if, for example, they have counter charge. So you have a bunch of knights, they're about to charge into a bunch of enemy knights, and you're like, cool, I'm gonna make them strike last. Amazing, because you
Yep.
know what? Knight fights. If the other person strikes last, it's a bloodbath.
Yep, but it's also a hex spell. That means you're casting this before your movement phase. So it means you already had to be within 12 inches of whatever you're casting it on. So again,
So
it
Demon
is
Prince,
not
you
easy
fly in there and you
to
go,
trigger
aha,
this.
I'm gonna touch you. Yeah.
You could try. So again, I love the potential of what the spell they were trying to accomplish with it. I think they made the terms and conditions too challenging to actually for this to be applicable.
Yeah. I would definitely play a Slaanesh Warriors of Chaos army if I ever make a ninth army. Mark Nurgle Fleshy Abundance. I see people play this sometimes, especially on a Demon Prince, just to try to give your toughness
Hmm.
increased.
Hmm.
It does do the unit you've joined too, and it remains in play. The only problem is remains in
Hmm.
play spells that are cast on 7 are dispelled on an 8.
Yep, that's exactly the problem. So you
Ugh.
actually don't want your remains in play to actually be such a low casting value. You want it to be a higher casting value, so it's harder for the enemy to dispel it. In particular, because if it's a remains in play for something that you want to get into combat, that means you are moving towards the enemy. And if you're moving towards the enemy, it's just getting you're going to get closer and closer to getting this ripped off of you. So again, I
The
love the idea of the concept, but I don't think they fully thought this through.
yeah, the the best thing about this is for getting shot at. I think so. If you're like, cool,
Mhm.
I'm gonna make myself tougher. Hard for you to shoot me.
Yep, but again, you want to cast the Demon Prince, but the Demon Prince is either a lone character not being shot, or he's not joining a unit, so he's not casting it on them. So this is really only going to be applicable for shooting if you're going to be that Sorcerer Lord. And that Sorcerer Lord, you could be in the infantry brick on the foot, but again, you're moving fairly slow, and typically you want to use that as a shooting bunker, not necessarily worry
Also,
about that.
if you have the Infernal Puppet, you want to be within 24-inch range of the enemy lizard who can then dispel this.
Exactly right. So again, I love the idea of it, but I think the actual the terms and conditions of the scenarios where it actually would be applicable is just too easy to counter because you're going to be within range of that level 4. That level 4 to gets +4 to dispel. He's got to roll like a 4 on 2 dice to turn this off. It's just yeah, too easy to get rid of it.
So I think that's probably the worst one then, because I think I could see a use for all the other ones.
Yep, and you could see though as we talked them through why everybody goes for the blue fire Tzeentch because it just works and it just makes sense and it's very effective.
Also, I think Acquiescence also makes the most sense if you have units that have like great weapons. So you're still charging, but your still strikes last. You're
Hmm.
only gonna be like an initiative 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever when you get there. And some people actually do go before that. So if you want to just even playing field, right? That's why I think
Hmm.
Marcus Slaanesh on your units and on your wizards and stuff is a great way to try to make regular Warriors of Chaos actually function. If you have them and Chosen and stuff like that, it without
Hmm.
something to buff their initiative. Because again, I play elves a ton, and Marcus Slaanesh is basically what if elves had toughness 4?
Hmm.
So initiative math is very important.
Yep, has tons of potential. Cool.
Okay.
Did we get to the end of our segment 1?
Yes.
We did. We're looking at cool pictures. All right. So if you got to the end, please do like, share, subscribe, and we will pick this up, continuing with the core units on section 2. Evan, any last thoughts for part 1?
Remember when you could like summon a freaking chimera as a spell that would then attack people? I think that was cool. We should bring that back.
Yeah, that was really cool. All right. We
You know
will
what?
see you all next
Beastman
time on
might get to
part
do that.
We'll
In
see.
the,
I don't know.
all right, they're getting a whole new lore of magic. They're going to do some stuff that's crazy.
They are. We're going to find out hopefully real soon.
Okay,
All
we
right.
will
Thanks,
finally end the
everyone.
show. Okay, we'll end it.
Bye.
Bye.